Mr. Birdie and members of the board, we do have several items for board discussion this evening. Our first item for board discussion is in regard to the possible purchase of property in Fairfield Township, and Nancy and I will be leading that discussion this evening. Make our way over there so people can see the screen instead of us. All right, Mr. Birdie and members of the board, Nancy and I are very excited to lead the discussion this evening about the possibility of purchasing some property from Fairfield Township. For my portion of the presentation, I've decided to break it down into the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. I don't like to read to the board, but this evening I decided this is such a huge topic of discussion. I see a lot of value in placing some details in the presentation versus bullet points so that our community members and media can easily access some of the details without having to go watch the presentation. So especially on the why, which I think is most important. So we'll begin with the who. The players in this are Fairfield City School District, Fairfield Township, Fairfield Township Community Investment Corporation. Sometimes that will be referred to as the CIC, and that is an economic development agent for the Fairfield Township Board of Trustees. The what is a possible purchase agreement between the Fairfield City School District and the Fairfield Township Board of Trustees and the Fairfield Township Community Investment Corporation. The purchase agreement is for 32 acres at $40,000 per acre, and Nancy will talk more specifically about the cost in a few minutes. The when. If approved, the agreement states that the purchase shall be closed within 30 days after all conditions of the purchase agreement have been met. Where. The property is located at the northwest corner of Hamilton Mason Road and Gilmore Road in Fairfield Township. I did distribute some maps, and for our viewers at home, I'll go ahead and display that map briefly so that they can access that if they choose to do so. The last W is the why, which I think is so important. I think there are a lot of important details to cover in the why section of this presentation. The district has an opportunity to purchase land at a very reasonable price, and we are very thankful to the Fairfield Township Board of Trustees for giving us this opportunity. In the first slide, I referenced $40,000 per acre, which is pretty much unheard of in our area. On many occasions, if you do some research, you'll come across $65,000 to $70,000 an acre, and many times it's often more than that. So we're very pleased at the possibility of purchasing this property at $40,000 an acre. And also, as I did thank the township, I do want to share just a little bit of background information. We have a great partnership with our township, and they actually approached us months ago to have some dialogue about the possibility of the school district purchasing the property versus taking it out to the market to see what kind of interest that they had. So again, I think that speaks volumes to the partnership that we have with our township and our trustees. The next part I'd like to touch on While we will begin Building Pride 2.0 process this fall, the district has no immediate plans to build new schools. And again, I did put that in all caps, bold, no immediate plans. I want to make sure that our community members know that exactly that we don't have plans at this time to build new schools. And again, I'll go back to the opportunity to purchase property at a reasonable price. That Building Pride 2.0 process does prepare us for the future. It allows us to have a plan in place if and when the district decides to consider new buildings, configurations, etc. We did complete a building process several years ago, and I can't tell you how often we would hear positive feedback from our staff members, from our community members, our stakeholders about, what a smooth process that was, from beginning to end. And I truly believe that process was smooth because of the work that went into that Building Pride process the first time around. And so I want to thank all of those individuals, and we've thanked them before, but that really is the reason that process went as smoothly as it did, basically because we were prepared. The district had plans to initiate this Building Pride 2.0 process prior to discussions about this property. If you recall, I don't recall the exact date, but it was some time ago, Mr. Penny spoke to starting that process, and we've taken our time, done our due diligence to begin that process, and we will begin an assessment of our buildings this fall. But again, I want to be clear that process was initiated, and again, going back, not to be repetitive, but because of the success story of our last building process, we knew that it was necessary to start that process. Next, I'd like to say, I do think there are a few things that we need to mention publicly. It is important to mention that our district is one of the few left to not offer all-day kindergarten. I believe it is in the best interest of our students, our families, and our community to offer all-day kindergarten. We've spoken a lot about early interventions for our students, and currently, we have them for half a day their kindergarten year, and allowing our students, our kindergarten students, to come to school for a full day, I think would be a tremendous opportunity for not just our students, but our families. They would love to send their kindergartners to us for a full day of instruction. And again, going back to those early interventions, that really can shape the future of some of our students and our community as well. However, I do want to go back to the second point I made, that while we are acknowledging that there is a need for all-day kindergarten in the future, we certainly are not saying that that's what we plan to do with this new site if the district does decide to move forward. It's also noteworthy to mention that several of our elementary schools are very close to capacity, if not there. Over the last several years, the district has had to create additional classroom space in some of those buildings by taking a room and putting up a wall, or converting some space that may not have been necessarily meant for instruction to be utilized for that purpose. So I want to acknowledge that as well. And again, in closing, none of those acknowledgments, the all-day kindergarten, the space issues, means that we plan to build a new building on that site to offer all-day kindergarten. Again, no immediate plans, but we are committed to that Building Pride 2.0 process, and we want to see where it takes us. And one of the most important pieces of the Building Pride process is that community input is a part of that process. We want to hear from our families, and not just our families of students that attend our school district, but our residents that live here that no longer have students in our schools. And I'll close with this. Mark Twain once said, quote, "Buy land, they're not making it anymore," which is very true. So We see this as a great opportunity to acquire some property at a very reasonable price in Fairfield Township, and we're really excited that the township reached out to us and that we are where we are today. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Slane.
So I always seem to get asked that one question of how are we going to pay for this? So tonight I just want to share with you a little bit about where that money is going to come from. Many of you have sat through my 5-year forecast presentations. That money that is included in the forecast is our general fund money, and that is, if you can think of it as one pot of money for our daily operations, capital improvements. That's one set of funds. We have lots of different funds, but the fund that's going to help us with this purchase is a $500,000 permanent improvement maintenance levy fund that we passed, our stakeholders passed, in 2014 when we ran the bond issue. So that was required with the assistance of the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, that we have to set aside money to help support our new buildings that we put in place. So that was the Freshman Central and Compass. And we're to set that aside for 23 years, which we have done the last 5 years, including this year. And we have not spent any money out of that fund as of yet. A portion of that money, like I said, is set aside for those buildings, but then there's also a portion that's available for us to spend on other buildings, or in this case, to purchase land. So the money that we have in that fund right now, again, has not been touched. So we've been able to accumulate over 5 years enough money to cover the cost, which is $40,000 per acre for 32 acres, which is $1,280,000. It will still leave us some money in that fund to utilize if we need to this year. Now, not a lot, but enough that in case there was an emergency that came up, several $100,000 would be available. So that is how we plan to make the purchase. Again, it's a separate fund. It's not with our general fund obligations. Any questions on funding?
I just have a question. Mrs. Lane, you talked about the .5 mil permanent improvement levy. So some of that money is set aside for the 3 new buildings.
Correct.
But there's also some left over that we're allowed to use for other things. And so it's that left over. We're not taking money that's set aside for our new buildings. It's something totally separate. Okay.
Totally separate.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Any other questions?
I have a question, doesn't necessarily relate to the financing. Should I ask that now or ask that later?
Sure. We'll talk to them.
So I actually have a statement and then a question. So the statement, basically, I was a part of Building Pride 1.0. It wasn't 1.0 then because we hadn't planned 2.0 as a community member. And it was an invaluable, amazing experience. And I felt I felt like we were really true to the process. It was a year-long process, and I didn't feel at all, again, my children were very young at the time, but I didn't feel swayed, or I didn't feel like the district was pushing us in any direction. So I'm excited to know that that's the vision for 2.0, is to see what the community really wants with this space, and that we're not going into it with any set plan in mind. And I'm glad that we're doing it again, because it was an amazing experience, and I think it valued everybody. My second question is, I know as part of that, we've built new schools, one of which is across from the high school. That would be Compass. And that was on land that the district already owned. Do you know when that land was purchased? Because that was way before.
1996 or so.
Okay. And it was purchased in a similar, just purchased for future planning? Was it ever purchased with a particular intent, or was it just purchased so that the school district had space to grow?
John?
Well, the person who owned the land at that time wanted to sell all of it. And so the arrangement was made to basically purchase all of it, knowing that at that point there was not an immediate need for it, but knowing that future schools could be built, and that's eventually what happened.
Because it was nice when it came around that there was that land there. It provided cost saving, you know, it was already in the school's library, yeah.
No, absolutely, and that's a great example, and again, not to go back to the price, but I wasn't involved directly in that process the first time when the district went through, they went through a process to acquire some property, and just to briefly touch on the price that, the proposed price that we're mentioning this evening, it was significantly higher, and that was years and years ago. And it was higher back then than it is what we're proposing this evening. So, and again, that idea that you now have the property, that takes one huge part of the equation. It removes it from that process if you already have the property. So
Going through that experience made me very appreciative of and again, I wasn't on the board then, I was just a community member and parent, but I was very appreciative of the planning that had been done, boards and boards and boards ahead of that. And the foresight I was very appreciative of it today, for whatever they have done in the past to get us to that point. So it's nice that we're continuing that tradition, I guess, is how I feel.
yeah, absolutely.
That's it.
So our next steps tonight include a board discussion. You will see an action for the board later on in the agenda. If that passes, we will ask Mr. Birding to sign on the purchase agreement, including myself. And then once everything is settled, we will fund that at the closing. So I guess we're on to board discussion. If there's any other questions we can help you with.
Open it to the floor for questions and comments.
I do have a comment. The 40,000 per acre, I have to say, I went back and looked at what we purchased our land for out in the township almost 20 years ago, and it was 35. I think it was 35 an acre. So I'm very impressed with the price. Just looking back through my own records, basically it was a good practice for me. I think it was basically clear that the price is really good. So, it does make sense because we're not making any more land. The location here is ideal. I mean, it's a great location. It's really prime real estate, in my opinion. And I think this is it's a very smart move. It prepares us for whatever we do in the future. And I must say, it makes sense. And a lot of the growth that we have in the district is out in the township. I think they're growing at something like 3% a year?
Yeah, something
It's
like that.
a decent clip of growth. And so this really makes sense. Thanks for bringing this to us, and thanks for the work with the township. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Begley?
I think we've covered it all here. I think the key is to have a plan, and we had a plan the first time and worked it, and we're starting a plan knowing that this is a long-term project, and it starts with acquiring a piece of property, and that's what we're doing here tonight.
Well, what I like about this property is when we were looking to purchase property to build Compass, we were looking at this same general location, but there was nothing there. And part of the expense was going to be us putting in utilities. And that was a major expense. And dealing with several different government entities. We had to deal with Butler County Commissioners and the City of Hamilton. And now that the public sewer is already there, that eliminates a lot of headaches for us and a lot of expense. There's a fire station butting up against the property, so anything that happens at the school building, we have first responders right there. There's a hospital on the other side of the roundabout, so quick access there. It's near a subdivision that's already in place, and so it's settled in a neighborhood setting. And also the roundabout has already begun.
Yeah.
So the ease of traffic should be really good. I'm very grateful that, as well as what Mr. Smith said, that the trustees thought of the school system when they were looking for potential partners to purchase their property, and they could have probably demanded a much higher rate from another developer, but they wanted to partner with the schools, and I'm very grateful for that. I do think it's a very fair price. We were looking at almost double that, if my recollection serves me, when we were looking to do Compass. They wanted a much higher price, and now that the township owns it, we were able to get a better price. And it definitely gives us options for a number of different things. Whatever the community would like to see, it gives us a place to do that. And it's much easier to have the land and then figure out what you're going to do with it than figure out we need to do something and then try to find some place to do it. So I like this idea. And I want to thank Mr. Clemens and Mr. Smith and Mrs. Lane for working with the township officials and working out a fair deal for us. And I'm looking forward to the possibilities that are out there. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Smith, we'll take item number 2.
All right, our next 3 items will be covered by Mr. Penny this evening. He's going to be talking about the academy renovation, multi-purpose building, and the 2019-2020 bus route. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Penny.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. The first 2 items that I'll be discussing kind of go together, and the third one's separate. I'll begin with the academy renovation. From the prior board meeting, the estimated cost for the inside renovation of that storage area to become a 6 through 8 academy hasn't changed since the prior presentation. So you have a handout, you also have an email that I sent earlier that has that cost, and then also a contingency amount applied to it. Because anytime you go into construction, just whether you're building, our actual schools that were just finished, or in this case, a renovation, there's always unknowns that you run into. So I've included that cost in there also for the contingency allowance. If you don't mind, I would like to move to the next item and then have whole discussion unless you would like to talk about the academy separately.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So for the multipurpose building, estimated costs have increased for the multipurpose building due to 2 factors. We have increased the size of the storage based on communication from last building, and then also reevaluation, adding 3,500 square feet to this building. That came at a price of $62,000. The other factor was the completion of the civil engineering report, which architectural and civil engineering are crucial, and that's part of what I talked to you about last time, having permission to go ahead and start that process. Unbeknownst to myself or the builder, which builds these buildings frequently, there's going to need to be additional lot prep and site preparation. That includes the bringing in of dirt and then the grading. This results in an addition estimated at $49,000. Now, anything we can do to cut that cost, we definitely will do. Some of the things that at least I've looked at that didn't turn out to be as sound of an option. For instance, typically if you're building something like that, you're able to scrape the land around it and regrade and so forth. We don't want to do anything to impact those plain surfaces and fields that are behind there that already have the established grass. So that kind of threw that out the window. I've also communicated with connections with Fairfield City to see if there's any projects they have where they have extra dirt, things like that as a partner type situations. And then I've reached out to contractors that they're working with. At this point, haven't been able to find the quality of dirt that we would need for foundational purposes. But we're doing everything we can to cut into that $49,000. The contractor that would be doing the excavation work has said that he is willing to donate 10% of the total cost, whatever that ends up being. $49,000 is estimated, back to the district because he's a local contractor and he wants to do the best he can do for us. So for that project, I also included a 7.5% contingency. We still have utilities and things to go in to run up to that building. Seems like it should be pretty straightforward, but with all projects, there's times when things come up. So at this point, for those two items, I'd like to turn it over to the board, if there's any discussion.
Questions or comments from Mr. Penny about the academy renovation or the multipurpose building? When you you figured out you needed more storage space, we had talked a little bit about that because right now you're moving things around, and so I'm glad that you went ahead and did some more research, and it's easier to do that now than it would be later, so I do appreciate that very much. Anybody else, comments or questions?
I think you kind of covered it. So we really need to raise the elevation of the site as opposed to bringing it, leveling it off, so to speak, and lowering it. Probably, as I think about it now, if trucks are going to pull up to it, you probably need it at a certain height anyway, right?
Well, from a visual perspective, it appeared to be on a gentle grade, but over 150 feet, there's a lot of fall there, and it's 70 feet wide. So yes, we have to bring it up to be level, and then make sure we do it in a way that will be able to shed water that doesn't compromise those playing fields that are around it. So.
I'm really excited about the academy renovation. I'm excited about the opportunities that we're going to provide for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that need the individualized instruction. So I'm excited about that. I'm also excited about having the transportation office be more of a professional environment. Something that we've needed for a while. So thank you very much. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I think it's a valid point. I know at the last conversation, there was talk about simply doing a renovation to that building, but I still feel that even with the additional cost, this is the right step. And if that building's beyond a renovation, and this is what we need to do moving forward.
Thank you. And then 2019, 2020 bus routes. Annually, the bus routes are sent up for approval or provided for approval to the board. We didn't actually include the packets because with the amount of students we route, you would have reams of paper in front of you. They're definitely available upon request, and that will also be an action item on the agenda this evening.
Okay. Any questions on bus routes?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, our next two items will be covered by Mr. Martin. He'll be talking about some job descriptions and some policies. I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, and members of the board. I have two job descriptions for you to take a look at this evening. They both deal with our nurses. The first one is a school nurse job description, and I want to make you aware of the fact that we have one school nurse for the district. This is an ODE licensed school nurse who also serves as a school nurse in one of our buildings. All the other buildings have registered nurses, and their job description is different. This school nurse is paid on a teacher's salary scale, and they take on some leadership responsibilities for all of the nurses and the nursing in our district. So the job description is a little different than the others, and we're just tweaking the job description. We're basically making it district-wide instead of where most nurse job descriptions are just for an individual building. This makes it a little bit wider, so we've included the word district in several parts of the job description so that we can see that. We've added information about related trainings, and we've also added 3 new essential functions at the end of this job description, given this head nurse the job of identifying appropriate nursing tasks to delegate to others because she can't do it all herself, and to do the same thing for orientation and training, to ensure compliance with all necessary state annual reports, which is quite a job. And also, she will be the one that will coordinate the new nurse and substitute nurse trainings. So that's the changes in that job description. Any questions about that one? Okay. The next job description is nurse department head. All of our departments and grade levels across the district have department heads, and the nursing department is no different. And so this person will work under the school nurse, the certified school nurse for the district, and we just wanted to delineate some of the responsibilities to show who will take care of which jobs. And so this job description has been changed so that the school nurse, the department head is actually assisting the school nurse in a number of these responsibilities. And that's basically, this job description is just being tweaked. Some of the language cleaned up. There's nothing that's earth-shattering there, but we didn't want to make changes without it going before you. Any questions about the nurse department head for the district?
Any questions? Hearing none?
All right. Then I have three policies, or actually two policies and an exhibit tonight. We'll start with the exhibit. It is BDDF-E. Exhibits don't usually come before the board because they're usually in flux. They change a lot. But this particular exhibit is for the voting method of the board. And so I thought you would want to be aware of the changes that are taking place there because it directly involves you. And so the main change is that on the third page of this exhibit, there is a key that shows you how many votes you need for each type of vote that you're doing, and that key has changed according to OSBA and with laws that are in place now in the state of Ohio. And so you will see numbers throughout this exhibit showing the number of votes that you need to pass certain items. Those numbers have changed to be in correspondence with the key that's at the end. Other than that, there's just some language cleanup, some numbering cleanup. We've taken out some language that is obsolete. For instance, using a county superintendent for some of the positions, or an obsolete section that talked about no textbook can be changed with, or altered or revised within a 4-year period after the date of selection. That language is obsolete, so we've really cleaned up this exhibit quite a bit, brought it in line with OSBA's exhibit. Any questions about this?
Questions, comments? No?
Okay, I'll move on to two other policies then. The first one is policy GBCB. It's staff conduct. The major change here is the legal references and cross-references have been changed. And the major impetus for changing this policy is those legal references that are changed. The Gun-Free Schools Act and the Gun-Free School Zones Act was changed, and so it resulted in those acts being references for this policy. And basically what it is, and we've already had the standard language in there that says that unless otherwise permitted by law, staff members are not permitted to bring a deadly weapon or dangerous ordinance into a school safety zone. With those two acts, it doesn't change the language, but we have to refer to that when we're implementing this policy, because under the new laws, under these acts, they are allowed to bring them and have them in their vehicles parked on school property. In the past, they weren't able to do that, but it's very specific how they have to be holstered or locked. If they're not if they get out of the car has to be secured. There's very specific language. So we're making that reference there to, so that everybody knows what the intent of the staff conduct policy is. That's the main change for that. Are there questions about that one?
I do have a question. It's not necessarily the specifics of the policy. So a staff member would have to let the district know that they are actually carrying the firearm or storing it in their car, right? They'd have to actually let the district know that?
I don't
or-
think, I'm not aware that they would have to let them know that, but where we would probably find out if it wasn't properly stored away and someone would have sight of it. But they are permitted to have it in their car under very stringent conditions. It has to be in their glove box, it has to be with them sitting in their car and it holstered, or it has to be put in some type of a locked box within their car. And once again, if they ever leave their car, the car has to be locked. But I'm not aware that they have to tell anyone that it's there.
And is that Gun-Free Schools Act and Gun-Free Schools Zones Act, is that a state law, a national?
Well, this is the state of Ohio.
State of Ohio.
Yeah.
Well, the two references there to
Oh, it's
United
US,
States Code
United
are-
States Code, yeah.
Are federal.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But this came from our OSBA.
yeah.
But yes, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Clements. All right. Any other questions about that one?
No.
The final one is policy KGB, which is public conduct on school property. So we just talked about staff conduct with the Gun-Free Zone Acts, and now the same type of information is placed here for the public conduct as well. The public is responsible for the Gun-Free Schools Act, just like the school members themselves are. The same things apply to them. So in this policy, we did not have the language unless otherwise permitted by law, which is what the Gun-Free Zone Act does, that no person is permitted to bring them on in a school safety zone. So we've added that language. The other change to this policy has to do with the public's conduct at sporting events or athletic events. That wasn't in the policy before, it was somewhat assumed, but now it's very specific that it relates to athletic officials, coaches, athletes. So that language has been added. There's also information here concerning good conduct and sportsmanship that has been added to show, that we are to encourage and have that. One of the portions here is that before athletic events, any place that there's athletic events, we now need to post rules, if this policy is accepted, rules for behavior for attending a sporting event. So that would be part of our policy here as well. Once again, the references have changed. The other part of this is that we did have some language about who was authorized to prohibit or limit people from attending if their behavior got bad, who could do anything. It's actually been simplified very much. It's whoever is in charge on the property, if via a principal or an athletic director, they get to decide if someone's behavior is inappropriate for a certain event, and they can ask the person to leave if it is inappropriate. And then we have the backup of local law enforcement if they would refuse to leave or be unruly. So that's the route that we're taking when there is public conduct that's not appropriate on school property. Any questions about this policy?
Questions? No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Before we move to our last item for board.
Excuse me, Mr. Smith.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm
Mrs.
sorry.
Shorter has something.
Oh, I didn't realize.
I
I
apologize.
apologize.
I'm so sorry,
Oh,
Mr.
it's okay.
Smith. I'm sorry,
That's okay.
Roger. The policy of this Gun-Free Schools Act, did it give an exact perimeter in which these guns could be stored? Is there a
We're talking
certain
about
radius?
we're talking about on school property. So
Yes.
if wherever, they can bring them, because they're talking about the guns being in an automobile, so it will be in a parking area.
So there's no specific radius or perimeter?
Not to my knowledge, I think it just talks about them being on the school property. So it's not like a certain distance away from the building or anything, it's just, before they were prohibited, the whole property was a
Yes.
a safety zone in the past. But now, because of the concealed carry that's permitted, it can be anywhere on school property that an automobile is supposed to be.
Okay,
Anything else, Mr. Shore?
no, that's it.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Smith?
All right, thank you. Before we move to our last item for board discussion, I did want to just acknowledge that we have Todd Thackeray with us this evening from SHP, and I meant to acknowledge his presence when we were doing our presentation, and wanted to have him here for the board as a resource in the event that there were any additional questions about the property. And so again, I just wanted to thank Todd for being here this evening. We appreciate him coming. So, and moving right along, the next item for board discussion, Fairfield Parade of Lights. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Birdie.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I forwarded an email on to everyone that I received from the Parks, Fairfield Parks Board, about they're going to have a inaugural Fairfield Parade of Lights on Sunday, December 1st. And we are invited to participate, and I was just wanting to gauge people's interest if you would like to participate in the parade. It's a very short parade, it's like 0.7 miles, but reading the requirements is that we cannot march.
Right, we can't walk.
So we would have
No
to
walking.
ride on something. So this is something that we could do, this is something that we could pass on, this is something that we could get maybe all the administrators and administration involved in and come up with something really fun to do. Might be a nice, team building activity to do together without getting too crazy. I don't want to be beating a cowbell, around. So, for that video, but, so I just wanted to see what people's interests were, if we should, maybe, if there's interest, we should then start the process of planning something. So,
Is the school district participating?
Depends on what you say this evening.
Yeah, I
So
see.
I mentioned to Mr. Birding earlier today, it's totally up to the board, but, if the board had an interest, we might explore. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to look at some of the pictures that were provided, so, we could, depending on how many people are involved, we could put one of our school buses in there, or maybe one of our transportation vans. So it's up to the board.
I'm a fan of the holidays, so this kind of stuff, I'm always on board, so I'm not a,
well, I know Mr. Smith hates Christmas. Now, he's a big fan of Christmas, so I'm sure he would be eager to do this.
Oh, didn't you see me light up when I said Parade of Lights?
I think this might be a fun team building activity to do. No pressure, I just think it might be fun, but I don't want to pressure anybody else into doing it. I know the holidays can get very busy with preparing.
it's nice that this is
Christmas and-
early, December 1st, so
Right,
that's early.
right.
And I feel like it's important, if this is their inaugural parade, I feel like it's important for us to
School
step up and
support
not
I
to,
agree.
Sounds good. I think it'll be fun.
And I think Mrs. Gundrum said that she would organize it. No.
Great.
Just joking. I don't want to speak for her. I don't want to put her on the spot, but, all right, so maybe in the near future, we should start thinking about how we're going to go about this. If we should form some sort of two-person committee to organize it so that we're not a quorum, or, but at least it's on the table that we're interested in doing that, and we should be thinking about what we could do. Okay? Great.
All right. Mr. Birding, are you planning on responding to the city on behalf of the board? Or would
I
you
will.
like for me? Okay.
I will.
Okay. All right. Mr.
All right,
Burt?
go ahead.
All right.
Sorry.